And you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Sputnik International reports elections and lithium mining. Why is the U.S. suddenly running get out the vote ads in Nigeria? Nigeria, Africa's most populous country and largest economy, held national elections on Saturday. Last Thursday, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, shared a video on her Twitter feed showing herself, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, and USAID Administrator Power asking the people of Nigeria to vote and make your voices heard to choose your future. Why? Well, for insight, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery, Jim Crow, and the Roots of American Fascism. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, sir, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
So the Sputnik piece continues. On the face of it, the video is non-offensive and promotes an idea virtually no one could oppose, a free and open election in Nigeria. But if the Twitter comments are any barometer, few people believe that the U.S. government's intentions in Nigeria are so innocuous. And we know now that the results have been coming in since Saturday. There are some claims of interference and problems, but overall, your thoughts, Dr. Gerald Horne.
Well, unfortunately, Washington has a questionable record to live down to with regard to Africa's most populous country and with the biggest economy. I'm referring more specifically to the internal conflict that raged in Nigeria some decades ago involving a so-called secessionist movement known as the Biafra movement, led by the substantial ethnic group known as the Igbos. It was no secret that Washington was in favor of this secessionist movement, which almost tore the country apart and ultimately was suppressed. But still, there is lingering feeling in that part of Nigeria with regard to independence, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Washington is not indifferent to that. Secondly, there have been tensions between Nigeria and South Africa for various reasons that need not detain us here. South Africa now has a gathering negative reputation in Washington because of its membership in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It's holding a military maneuvers off the coast of South Africa in recent days with the Russian and Chinese militaries. That drew a stern rebuke from Washington, which was ignored by South Africa. And once again, I feel that it's not naive to suspect that Washington is wishing for a more substantial role in Nigeria so that its foreign policy can be manipulated against Pretoria, which brings us to the third point, which is that on these airwaves in particular, we've talked about the recent moves towards a confederation of Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Conakry, all former French colonies, all developing positive relations with Moscow. Once again, this is not viewed benignly in Washington. Those countries are either part of or can be directly influenced by ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, of which Nigeria is a constituent component. And certainly, once again, Washington would like to be able to steer the foreign policy of Nigeria in order to checkmate Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Conakry. So as you look at Africa's largest country with a substantial deposit of oil, with a substantial deposit of natural gas, which is seen also as pivotal in terms of blunting natural gas and oil exports from Russia into Western Europe, you can well understand why Secretary Blinken and Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, are so concerned with events in Nigeria.
Based upon the early results that you're seeing, are their wishes being followed? Is the candidate that they're backing to be president, how is he doing? Because I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, it's unclear. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil in Nigeria. It's no secret that the government introduced new banknotes just days before the election, which has led to riots at ATM machines, also suppressing turnout, also complicating the counting of the votes that are emerging. So I think it's too soon to tell whether or not Washington's wishes will be granted.
Antiwar.com, China releases a 12-point peace plan for Ukraine. They released it on Friday. Here's what's as a potential settlement for the war in Ukraine. What's interesting is within the last hour, there's been an announcement that Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, has endorsed this peace plan, a member of both the EU and NATO. I find that interesting, Dr. Horne.
Well, yes. Mr. Orban was one of the few European leaders to entertain the visiting state counselor of the People's Republic of China during his recent visit to the Munich Security Conference. We also know that President Zelensky has not spoken ill of the Chinese peace proposal. Diplomacy is heating up. President Xi of China is due in Moscow rather shortly. President Lukashenko of Belarus, one of Moscow's closest allies, is due in China on Tuesday. I think the calculus by many outside of the hawks in the North Atlantic bloc is that Washington and its allies would like to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. They see this as a way not only to weaken Russia, but to weaken China's major ally, which is Russia. And so that is hastening this move towards diplomacy. And I'm not sure Viktor Orban of Hungary is the best tribune for this message. It's well known that he's close to conservative Republicans. He spoke at the Conservative Political Action Committee in Texas just months ago. But yet, I cannot say that I'm unhappy by the fact that he has embraced the Chinese proposal.
Two things on this story. One is when you look at the 12 points, none of them have to do with returning land that has been seized. And the other is it says Zelensky expressed openness to some of the ideas and says he'd like to meet with Xi. So your thoughts on A, you're not getting any of your land back, and and B, Zelensky wants to talk to Xi, and I don't know where Boris Johnson is flying, where he's planning to fly to tell Zelensky this is not a good idea.
Well, Mr. Zelensky does not have many cards to play. His economy plummeted by 30% during 2022, and it's expected to do similarly terribly in 2023. At the same time, it's no secret that it's going to be a hard and difficult lift to get Crimea back, that is to say for Ukraine to get Crimea back, not to mention portions of eastern Ukraine, or what used to be called Eastern Ukraine, I should say more accurately. At the same time, Mr. Zelensky is being pushed by the hawks in both London, speaking of Boris Johnson, and Washington, speaking of the U.S. President and the Secretary of State. And I hope that he's intelligent enough to see that he is now being used as a sock puppet for their narrow and venal purposes, or at least let's hope that he is able to perceive that stark reality.
Another interesting article. Now, this is from a year ago, and as you know, there is a bit of a controversy going on in Taiwan and China regarding the outcome of the any conflict on the Taiwanese. And this article, Chip Geopolitics, if China invades, make Taiwan unwantable by destroying TSMC military paper, suggests, in light of the ongoing controversy about an alleged plan, which was part of a satirical tweet, to destroy Taiwan, when you look at this, to be quite frank, it certainly appears like a plan to destroy Taiwan, Dr. Horne.
Well, certainly TSMC in Taiwan is a major cog in the political economy, not only of the capitalist countries, but to a degree of the entire world. They produce these chips that are so important for smartphones, vehicles, and computers, and all the rest. At the same time, keep in mind that TSMC is now building a multi-billion-dollar facility in Arizona. The problem is that for various reasons, TSMC executives do not feel that the Arizona plant can replicate or duplicate their plant in Taiwan. And so that makes all the more problematic this idea that Washington has of turning Taiwan into a porcupine. That is to say, this island of 21 million supposedly is going to be able to confront this nation of 1.3 billion, speaking of the People's Republic of China, by bristling with porcupine quills and needles. But I don't think that that's sufficient. And I think that they're in for a drubbing, not unlike what you see unfolding in Ukraine as we speak.
You talked about the TSMC plant in Arizona. Biden touted that as, you know, this incredible victory, but I was waiting for you to finish, and I was going to ask you about that plant. You've touched on it. It doesn't seem to be, it's not going to wind up being what Joe Biden touted it as being.
Well, to speak delicately and charitably, TSMC executives, and I was trying to avoid having to repeat their comments, they don't feel that U.S. workers are sufficiently trained or culturally attuned to deal with the sophisticated manufacturing process that is prevalent in Taiwan. However, you know that there's the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which, despite its title, provides major subsidies to U.S. competitors to TSMC, who are in the process of building similar plants in Ohio and elsewhere in the United States of America. So obviously, this is a huge deal, and it's part of the calculus as to whether or not these rather fearsome headlines we now see in today's press, that is to say, war with China, which of course could easily tip into World War III, chips are going to be a major factor in the outcome of that rather unfortunate state of affairs.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.